We shall prove that Mr. Novak has been harassed and discriminated against by his supervisor, and that management did not equitably apply discipline in accordance with Article 8, Sections 1 and 2 of the contract. It will be evident that management will not be able to meet its burden of proof requirements. We ask as a remedy that the warning and suspension notices be expunged from Mr. Novak's file and that he be made whole for the 10 days of lost pay.
Mr. Murphy, do you wish to place the contract into evidence?
Mr. Arbitrator, we have both agreed to submit the language of Articles 3, 8, 12, and 14 of the contract as a joint exhibit.
All right, therefore it'll be marked as Joint Exhibit 1.
I imagine they'll try to make a case out of disparate treatment, that the city wasn't uniform in its application of discipline.
Well, can the personnel records help us on this?
Not much. What we need to know doesn't leave an audit trail. Oral reprimands don't get into the files. And of course there's no record at all of employees who were late and not disciplined. I tell you, I want you to call the department heads. If someone is not enforcing the mayor's orders, I've got to know.
Now, Curtis said she spoke to a number of employees informally.
Yes, and I'm really concerned about this. If she had other employees who were late and she didn't warn them, there had better be a satisfactory explanation. Murphy will have my hide if he can show that Curtis was picking on Novak. Call Lee. I want her to write all this down before she forgets it. Who did she talk to? Who was also late and didn't get a reprimand? And under what circumstances? I also want you to get me a copy of the bulletin prepared by the hospital administrator. We'll need to enter it as an exhibit.
You think they'll try to represent Lee as a poor supervisor?
They may try, since she's new. But I think she'll hold up under cross-examination.
There's a new pathologist at the hospital who worked with her at another hospital. He said he'd be glad to be a witness as to her competence as a supervisor.
That shouldn't be necessary. She's not on trial. But you might get him to stand by just in case.
How many grievances have we had on this since we started negotiating with the city?
This is the first one that's gone to arbitration. Most of these kind of things are handled informally or at the first or second step. One was headed for arbitration, but it was settled at the last minute.
What have the other departments been doing concerning tardiness?
They're cracking down. There have been some written warnings issued, but no other suspensions.
Well, then why 10 days for Novak? That's too heavy.
I think it's because he's so damned obstinate.
Well, for Pete's sake, when we get him on the stand, don't let him make any sermons on the spiritual benefits of jogging. I want him to reply to specific questions. Now, is there anything else you can think of that might tip the scales in our favor?
First, Novak is an excellent technician. Nobody can deny that. It's a matter of record. Second, he was obviously treated very severely.
I got an idea, Ted. See if you can get a hold of his personnel records. Maybe there's some fine points.
I will call as my first witness Ms. Lee Curtis.
Well, tell me, gentlemen, do you wish the witnesses to be sworn or not?
Yes.
No.
We'd prefer to have the witnesses sworn.
We feel it's an empty gesture.
Well, I've heard you both. The witnesses will be sworn.
You may have to testify under oath, but in any case, you'll need to reveal persuasively and accurately the events leading up to the suspension. So if you will, Lee, could you run through it one more time?
All right. Well, first there was the directive from management. Clamp down on all employees who arrive late or leave early. I immediately thought of Novak. He's always late returning from
Don't volunteer that unless you're asked. Murphy could make a case and use that to suggest that you had it in for Novak.
I posted the bulletin on June 6th and held a meeting of all the employees in my unit to explain it to them. I'm sure they understood what it was all about.
Okay. Then what happened?
Well, the next day, Novak was 10 minutes late. By the time he'd showered and eaten his lunch, he was half hour late starting work. I reminded him that he was going to have to comply with the bulletin just like everyone else.
Tell us what happened next.
The following day, June 8th, he was late again. This time he was about 15 minutes late before returning to his workstation. Then he ate his lunch at his workstation.
What action did you take?
This time I gave him a stern oral reprimand. I told him that if he continued to violate the rule, that he'd be subject to further disciplinary action.
Then what happened? The following day.
He was late again, about 10 minutes this time. Then he started eating his lunch, just like before.
Then what did you do?
I felt that this time I had to issue a formal written reprimand.
Mr. Arbitrator, I would like to enter as an exhibit a copy of that reprimand.
Well, if there are no objections, then I will mark this as Management Exhibit Number 1.
Miss Curtis, what was Mr. Novak's reaction to the written reprimand?
He didn't take it too seriously. As a matter of fact, he was rather argumentative. He said that jogging stimulates his mind and body. He seems to think he can do whatever he wants.
Objection. She can't testify as to what someone else thought.
Well, I'm going to sustain the objection. Miss Curtis, simply tell us what you said to him and what he said to you.
Yes, sir. Well, later that day, I overheard some other employees saying that Novak had no intention of quitting jogging.
Objection. She's doing it again, Mr. Arbitrator. That's hearsay.
Well, I'm not going to sustain the objection on the ground of hearsay, but Mr. Calloway, please keep your questions more specific.
Yes, sir. Miss Curtis, after Mr. Novak was late returning from lunch on 3 consecutive days, were there any further occurrences?
Well, the very next day, on June 10th, he returned from his lunch break on time. But this time he proceeded to eat his lunch at his workstation.